Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to another Warhammer 40k lore video. Well, today we are going to talk about Ogryn Imperial Guard Regiments. Now, immediately I imagine you asking, hold on, aren't Ogryns legendarily dim-witted? To the point where even the cleverest amongst them have an IQ that could barely be compared to that of the average mentally deficient human child? How could they possibly operate in large military formations? Well, yes, and yes, they can't. But since GW has no idea what a regiment is, how large it is, or what it does, we can all kind of just ignore all of that and go with the flow, which is exactly what the Ogryn Imperial Guard Regiments do. As rather than operating together as a unified and organized force, the Ogryn Regiments are simply split into however many auxiliary detachments that nearby Imperial Guard Regiments want, and then dispatched to those regiments to be utilized as shock troopers. An idea that is as illogical as it is an utter nightmare for anybody and everybody running the logistics of these other formations, not to mention for the Ogryns themselves. But despite the incredibly unwieldy and utterly pointless nature of Ogryn regiments, they do actually exist. Although there aren't a whole lot of them, and they haven't been mentioned a whole lot throughout Warhammer 40k fluff either. In fact, one of the only absolutely for sure Imperial Guard Ogryn regiments we know of are the Orcus Stone Crushers, which have a bit of an interesting history. You see, the Angevin Crusade itself was a major Imperial military expedition to conquer and to some extent recolonize an area now known as the Calix Expanse. Back during the launching of the Crusade in the early 39th millennium, the region of space was known to have once belonged to the Imperium, but it had not for a very, very long time. Meaning that the Crusade was in essence more of a colonization effort rather than a real reconquest, as the area had been lost so long ago that nobody even really knew what to expect to find inside of it. The Imperial Crusade got off to a great start and met largely fractured and sporadic resistance, organized mostly by small Xenos empires or local pockets of resistance, rather than any major sort of organized force against the Imperium. This allowed the Imperials to come down upon each and every little Xenos realm with crushing might, as the Crusade was aided by several formations from major Space Marine chapters, as well as 2 Titan legions, and massive support from nearby rogue trader families, as the rogue traders obviously saw this as an opportunity to expand into virgin territory and do business with brand new and interesting luxurious goods that could no doubt be found inside of its nebulous, unexplored depths. The Adeptus Mechanicus was also very eager to plunge in ahead of the Crusade, hoping to secure any STC technology or otherwise lost human tech before the Imperium could complicate matters with all of their militaries. And one of the planets conquered by the Angevin Crusade was a world known as Orcus. Now, Orcus had initially been designated as a very low-priority world to conquer, and or liberate, depending upon who you're asking, as it was an extraordinarily high-gravity world due to the local planetary patterns of its solar system. It was judged to be well and truly inhospitable, bordering on the outright impossible for any sort of large-scale colonization or even basic utilization. as extracting its mineral resources, a fairly facile task in most cases, would probably be more expensive than any theoretical benefits it might grant to other nearby Imperial worlds. However, much to the Imperial Expeditionary Force's surprise, the planet turned out to already have been colonized. And not by some Xenos empire, but by humans. A very, 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 very long time ago, as the once human population had evolved, or devolved, again, depending upon who you're asking, into Ogryns. Now, Ogryn, of course, is a specific term used within the Imperium to refer to a stable set of mutants usually found on high-gravity worlds. This does not mean that all Ogryns are the same. It is instead a generalized classification of this type of mutation that meets a level of stability so as to ensure that it will not further mutate. Or, to put it more bluntly, it is a natural mutation, one caused by natural evolution, rather than anything spicier. There are many such worlds within the Imperium that for one reason or another were left isolated while still possessing a small but hardy Imperial colony that eventually evolved into modern-day versions of the Ogryns. The people of Orcus were no different. The Adeptus Mechanicus explorator fleets could determine that there were massive pre-made structures scattered all across the planet's surface that were obviously of early human origins. Once the Megos biologists also arrived, they could further confirm that yes, the population were human, albeit mutated by the extreme conditions. Thus, the Ogryns, after a brief period of violence, as the Ogryns didn't know what these weird people from the stars were, of course, the planet Orcus was included within the Imperium of Man, and, fortunately, like many Ogryn populations before, the Ogryns took to the teachings of the Imperial Creed with gusto, their rather simplistic minds finding the idea of Sky Daddy, who saw and judged their worth at all times, to be extraordinarily appealing. It provided them with something they'd always deep down desired: purpose, and simple instructions as well. Now, unfortunately, due to the extreme challenges of the heavy gravity environment, preachers and other Adeptus Administratum and Ministorum personnel could not actually stay on the planet for any extended periods of time. Not without having their lungs collapse inside of their bodies, anyways. But the people of Orcus still needed integration within the Imperium, and so stations were created in geosynchronous orbits above the world to allow for, well, in essence, proselytization and conversion efforts to continue, with the hopes of eventually developing Orcus into a proper civilized Imperial world. Or as civilized as the Ogryns would ever be capable of making it anyways. As for what to actually do with the world beyond civilizing and proselytizing to the locals, well, nobody really knew. Again, the world wasn't particularly rich. It certainly couldn't be used for any sort of agricultural venture, as, again, any normal plants would simply be crushed. Animal husbandry, too, was not really an option, and the mineral resources, well, the cost of extracting them in terms of labor, even assuming they could use the local Ogryn population, would be staggering, as most machinery would need constant repairing, which would also require constant presence of specialized personnel, which, on the planet, simply wouldn't be possible, meaning that any piece of mining equipment would have to basically be shuttled up and down to the orbital stations for basic maintenance and fixing. Furthermore, even if you could extract significant quantities of mineral resources from the world's hardy crust, you'd then have to lift the god-fucking things up into orbit again, and with the gravity being what it is, the expenditure in energy would almost certainly far outstrip anything they could actually gain from the resources. The Imperium doesn't like leaving worlds sitting around doing nothing, but there didn't seem to be a whole lot that could possibly be done with this one. Until one administratum drone had a brilliant idea. The world sucked, he said, loudly and proudly, as if he'd just realized something rather special. To which all of the other drones presumably echoed, "It sure shittin' does. How does that help us?" To which he responded, "We have millions upon billions of people within the Imperium that we really want to have sucky lives. Political prisoners, dissidents, terrorists, secessionists. There are a lot of people that the Imperium would like to torture, and furthermore, those people often attempted to escape their just punishment. So, why not get two birds with one stone? One, life on Orcus would most assuredly so be particularly awful, and two, are they gonna escape? Well, firstly, where are they gonna go? And secondly, when you weigh about 10 times as much as you do normally, escaping is a challenge, to put it mildly. And bonus atop bonus, the planet already came with a pre-installed, fanatically loyal population whose only real talent was following simple instructions, such as, don't let the political prisoner leave his cell. It was, frankly, for lack of a better word, genius. And the administratum quickly set about turning Orcus into a penal colony, staffed and ran by the Ogryns, with the occasional aid and oversight from the Adeptus Arbites, of course. This also meant that the Ogryns on world would get a rudimentary sort of education in organization and, well, how to take orders, basically, as at the end of the day, that's in essence everything that Ogryn training actually comes down to. How to take instructions, how to understand them, how to act upon them, and how to, well, I was about to say, not question, but that part you don't really need to bother about with an Ogryn. So long as you teach them the first two, the third is, frankly, not even optional, it's pointless. They're more than happy with the preceding two. Which, and this is a partially unfortunate thing here, also led to them becoming a very effective and very easy to militarize group of Ogryns. See, the Calyx sector is a bit of a standout portion of the Imperium right now, as it is home to one of probably the single most effective and successful secessionist movements within the entirety of the Imperium, that being the Severan Dominate, which has managed to create its own version of the Imperial Guard and spread rapidly throughout the Calyx sector, beginning to establish its own little mini-imperium within the Empire. And arriving on Orcus, they came prepared with a plan. They too knew that the Ogryn population were not the sharpest tools in the box, and so long, therefore, as the Severan Dominate could claim that what they were doing was the God Emperor's desire and his deepest, most secretive wish, the Ogryns were all too happy to obey. Who were they to question, after all? Strange people from the sky had been coming all along to tell them about the Emperor, and here were more strange people from the sky telling them about the Emperor. Why should they doubt this group over any other group? It's not like they could read official documents. It's not like seals of approval or paperwork would in any way be useful to an Ogryn. They, in other words, had no choice other than to trust what the people told them. And the Severan Dominant diplomats also informed the Ogryns that there were evil people on the planet, people who hated the God Emperor and wanted to lead the Ogryn away from their great glorious father's light. The Ogryn grew very upset about this and aided the Severan Dominate in purging the Imperials from their planet very, very effectively, and then became a big and also very, very useful part of the Severan Dominate's armies as they spread further across the Calyx sector. Ogryns, you see, make absolutely fantastic soldiers, so long as they can be controlled effectively, that is. Now, the Imperial Guard do so in most of the cases by organizing them into a small auxiliary formation that will then be assigned to other Imperial Guard regiments. Preferably, this should be on as relatively permanent a basis as possible, or at the very least they should be continuously assigned to formations that know how to handle them, as Ogryns require rather specific directions. Obviously, one would assume that there are a significant number of human auxiliaries within the Ogryn auxiliaries as well, fulfilling the roles of overall leaders, and we also have several mentions of commissars and other specialists being assigned to the Ogryns as well, presumably both to guide them directly in battle and also to inform the commanders of whatever regiment they are attached to that, okay, Ogryns are really good at smashing shit, but they have absolutely zero independent thought or capacity for thinking at all. So, how you use them is, you tell me what you want smashed, and I point in that general direction. You lean back and enjoy the fireworks. This became very useful for the Severan Dominate until they forgot one of the golden rules when it came to deploying Ogryns, and that is, always double-check their targets. See, whilst Ogryns are indeed amazing shock troopers, they do have their weaknesses. A complete and utter inability to approach any objective with any degree of tactical finesse, for example, being one of the most obvious ones. If you order a bunch of Ogryns to charge a heavy bolter emplacement, they'll do so, and odds are they'll probably even be able to take it, assuming there are no other heavy bolters in the area giving it cover. But they will take ridiculous casualties in so doing, as they will never even consider trying to sneak up on it, flanking it, or otherwise using any level of tactics, not unless being directed specifically to do so, and, well, again, whilst Ogryns are very good at taking orders, they're not very good at taking complex orders. If you were to lay out the perfect plan, all of the routes pre-planned, how to flank an enemy emplacement, how to lay down covering fire, how to throw hand grenades to keep the defender's head down before rushing the heavy bolter nest, etc., they wouldn't be able to understand it. They literally wouldn't be able to comprehend half of the instructions, and those parts of the instructions they could comprehend, they almost certainly wouldn't remember. And this furthermore holds true, by the way, even for the smartest of the Ogryns, which are given additional cerebral implants by the Imperium to make them smarter. And these are then named boneheads. They have the ability to, well, they're roughly as intelligent as the rest of the Ogryns, but crucially, they can at the very least understand basic hierarchies. And so the Imperium uses the boneheads to organize a small group of other Ogryns, usually no more than 10, maybe 20 at an absolute stretch. And even then, their capacity for receiving orders again, in essence, simply just amounts to go over there and attack that, but explain it to your fellow Ogryns this time. Anywho, this ended up biting the Severan Dominant rather viciously because they didn't do their due diligence. A huge formation of Ogryns in literally regiment strength had been organized to assault a major Imperial position. However, the Imperium had dispatched Ministorum agents to bolster the morale of the local defenders. That in and of itself wouldn't necessarily be that big of a deal, as the poor guardsmen didn't really have much of a chance against a few hundred angry Ogryns screaming as they charged at them anyways, but the Ogryns quickly recognized the official-looking robes of the Ministorum priests. Hold on, These were the people who had come to them from the stars. These were the people who had first told them about the God Emperor, their great golden father high up in the sky. What were they doing here? And why were the other sky people being so mean to them? This didn't make a whole lot of sense, and so obviously the boneheads decided to ask the priests why they were there. And that resulted in the entire Ogryn Regiment turning around and charging their previous allies, with predictable and catastrophic consequences, as the Severan Dominate were, well, no longer quite so dominant. Badum-tish. And to further illustrate the degree of regard that the Imperium hold for the Ogryns, almost like special idiotic pets that sometimes do dumb things, but the dumb thing in essence just becomes another part of the pet's charm. Normally, any population that had risen against the Imperium in an organized manner and waged war against it on, at this point, probably dozens of worlds and slaughtered God only knows how many Imperial Guard soldiers, would probably suffer extreme consequences. We're talking things like the mass levying of penal legions, or exterminators, or wholesale relocation of the entire population. Strident measures, to put it mildly, but the Ogryns of Orcus received virtually no consequences whatsoever. Oh sure, the Administratum headed over there once the world was liberated yet again. The priests of the Adeptus Ministorum went down to the world to check that their faith held strong, and it did. They obviously checked if there were any sign of secessionist influence or ideals amongst the Ogryns, and they didn't even know the meaning of a secessionist, of course. And so the entire Imperial apparatus quite simply concluded that no, the Ogryns were, quite literally, with no sense of irony or exaggeration as whatsoever, too stupid to be traitors. They honestly did not know what they did. They had no clue, and so there actually was no problem with just integrating them straight back into the Imperium. In fact, now that they had understood just how effective the Ogryns and the population of Orcus were in particular, with their previous training as Gaulers for the Administratum, well, they were now being levied in Imperial regiments to be dispatched to fight against the Severan Dominate and across the galaxy as well. Now, this is where we get to the idiocy of this particular thing. Now, if you wanted to actually run Ogryns in an organized fashion, what you would probably wish to do is levy them in warband size of probably hundreds, if not several thousands, depending on. These should then all be given an enormous human support network, focused exclusively on integrating them alongside other Imperial Guard units, or more correctly, replacing their need to integrate alongside other Imperial Guard units, because if you just go up to some random IG officer and say, hey, I'm gonna put a bunch of these huge-ass mutants under your command, do with them as you please, they're not really going to understand what they're going to use these guys for. Best case scenario, they throw them at the enemy and they achieve some solid results due to simple sheer muscle mass and determined retardation to crush anything and everything that stands before them. But that's about it, and probably suffers heavy casualties in the meantime, which isn't necessarily a bad thing as far as the Imperium is concerned, but still, to maximize Ogryn power in this case, you'd like to have at least a degree of understanding how to utilize them. So instead, you would have the Ogryn officer, or the human officer of the Ogryn unit, arrive at the IG headquarters and go, alright, so I have under my command a group of super specialized shock troopers. And the officer will go, oh, great, we need them to hold this part of the line. And he says, they don't do that. What do you mean they don't do that? They're They're retarded. If you tell them to stay there, they won't. They'll leave. They'll just run at the enemy if they see them. You can't rely on them to stand there. Okay, well, can we have them guard our supply lines? No, they'll just eat all of the foods. All right, anti-partisan duty? No, they don't know the difference between a partisan and an Imperial guardsman. And if you try to explain it to them, they won't get it. Well, what can we use them for them? Well, you tell me what you want smashed, and I'll communicate that intent to them. Simple as. Obviously, the Ogryns are also going to require their own logistics and supply organizations too. This actually does speak for a larger organization of Ogryns, where you could continuously route in new reinforcements to replace those lost in combat. As Ogryns, whilst they are a communal species as much as many other humans, they do not form particularly or uniquely strong attachments to one another. In fact, if anything, they tend to form far firmer commitments and attachments to the humans who serve alongside them than the Ogryns themselves. So as long as the commissar or priest or whoever is running their little group is still alive, they will probably remain quite attached and loyal to that person. But from a logistical standpoint, the Ogryns are a little bit of the nightmare because they don't use, well, virtually anything standard issue, really. Their armor is, well, a huge collection of regular Imperial Guard flak vests sewn together or haphazardly manufactured to fit together. It can and probably is produced in quantity somewhere, but they can't simply just dip into regular Imperial Guard stores and fish out a new one. Neither are their weapons standard either. The infamous Ripper gun, which is an enormous magazine-fed, well, assault shotgun. Closer to a heavy bolter, damn near, than a shotgun, really. And even their heavy weapon variants, such as the more recently introduced Faux Render, don't use any ammunition that regular Imperial Guard regiments really utilize. So all of that needs to be imported specifically for the Ogryns. And Ogryns have no sense or concept of trigger discipline whatsoever. An Ogryn will simply begin firing whatever weapon he's holding when he sees the enemy, in the, general direction of the enemy, sometimes. Occasionally, celebratory gunfire can also be quite common amongst Ogryn regiments, as it requires a certain form of strict discipline to level the weapons at the enemy before they start firing. This means that ammunition consumption is through the fucking roof, as the guns aren't so much to kill the enemy. If they do, then that's a nice bonus, but first and foremost, it is to create one heck of a racket, and because they've been told to fire their weapons at the enemy. This means that even though the average Ogryn is equipped with no less than 5 full reloads for his Ripper gun, they run out awfully quickly, and probably aren't going to last more than a single engagement in most cases, so you need a constant, overwhelming flow of Ripper gun ammunition to be brought in. Additionally, the Ogryns utilize a wide variety of close-quarters combat equipment. Some of this will be equipped by the Guard itself. Improvised weapons will often be brought by the Ogryns, like tribal weapons or clubs or giant stone swords, as is the case with this particular regiment. As Orcus does have a decent history of inter-tribe conflict using primitive weapons. Additionally, due to their attachment to the Adeptus Arbites, a lot of them also have access to massively oversized shock mauls. Though, considering the strength of the wielder, I imagine the shock isn't really going to be the killing force, so much as the sheer overwhelming blunt trauma of it. Even these weapons require frequent reissuing because, well, there's not really a whole lot of weapons that can survive being handled by an Ogryn, frankly. Even the Ripper gun, although having been specifically designed to survive some seriously rough handling, even it is going to require replacing surprisingly often. Even basic things like backpacks, medical kits, toolkits, canteens, sleeping bags, everything will need to be specifically manufactured to the Ogryns' requirements, as, well, a human canteen is going to be like issuing them with a single glass of water. The same with a sleeping bag. You could barely fit an Ogryn's leg in it, never mind the rest of them. Mess kits as well, as Ogryns require a hell of a lot more food than the regular humans, and there's another logistical challenge too. Ogryns require a lot of sustenance. On the bright side, however, they're capable and willing to eat damn near everything, meaning that their ability to forage in field is superb. In fact, that actually becomes another challenge for the Imperial officers overseeing them, because due to Ogryn's ability and happy willingness to eat just about anything, well, there are many things on the battlefield you shouldn't put in your mouth. Least of which, frankly, are unexploded ordnance, particularly when you're fighting chaos-infested enemies, or, tyrannids or general plague things, etc., etc., etc. Everything needs to be specifically produced and or customized for the needs of the Ogryns. This requires the establishment of an entirely separate, independent, and simultaneous logistical service that runs alongside the rest of the Imperial Guard regiments. This is, of course, a logistical fucking nightmare, and speaks, therefore, to the necessity to organize specific, dedicated organizations attached to the Ogryns, so as to not complicate the already, in all due likelihood, overly complicated Imperial Guard logistical system. Furthermore as well, Ogryns will need transportation, just like all other forms of troops, as, well, they could technically just walk everywhere, but in mechanized warfare, it's often not a fantastic idea. See, the problem here is that Ogryns really don't like enclosed spaces. They tend to go rather bonkers in an enclosed space, and so a lot of standard issue Imperial transportation simply isn't viable, like the Chimera, for example, for which they are literally forbidden from entering. But there are also several open-top transports that could carry at least a few Ogryns relatively safely, but even in these cases, of course, there needs to be a human officer on hand to go, no. Don't put a tarp on it. It'll trigger the passengers. Just leave it open to the sun and the sky. No, they don't care if it rains on them. Frankly, that is the least of their concerns, and considering the overwhelming violence of their reaction to being enclosed, should also be the least of your concerns as well. All of this needs specialist human intervention at damn near every single solitary level. So, in reality, an Ogryn Imperial Guard regiment should not operate so much as a singular unit, but rather as a parallel supply system, where the Ogryns are organized by their own commanding officers, they are supplied by their own logistical apparatus, and they are issued, not in the form of the Ogryns themselves to allied Imperial Guard forces, but rather those Imperial Guard forces will turn to the Ogryns commanders specifically to request the aid of their shock troopers. That would be a significantly more sensible way of doing it, and it is sort of how the Guard regiments do it, in that the Ogryns are split up into smaller units and then assigned, willy-nilly, to Imperial Guard regiments. Fortunately, in the case of a tabletop wargame where you have perfect control over all of your units, that's not really that much of a concern. Whereas in the case of an actual battlefield, oh boy, that would produce a tremendous amount of problems. I mean, we're not even going to get started on the communications issues. After all, if you send a squad of random Ogryns off to assault a position, how are you going to know if they succeeded? Have they been given enough training to operate comms equipment? Do they even make Vox backpack in that size? No? Okay. So you're going to have a commander with them. What if the commander dies? Then what? Have the Ogryns been briefed to whom they're supposed to report? Are they going to remember to whom they're supposed to report? Are they even going to be able to find their way back Are they even going to be willing to break off their assault after their designated objective has been captured? Etc., etc., etc. Yeah. In reality, utilizing any sort of troops with the IQ of your average severely mentally retarded child offers up a whole host of challenges. Challenges that the already somewhat inept Imperial Guard really isn't ready for. But, hey, on the bright side, we can all see the charm in giant, ugly, dumb, fanatically loyal lugs, whose only need for tactical finesse is a finger point and a go-get-'em lance. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Until then, have a good day.